Hello everyone, my name's David Vidal. Today I'm going to be talking to you about socioeconomic status, more so the inclusivity and or the exclusivity, more so about this topic. So moving on. This is the introduction. I'm sort of just going to be explaining what socioeconomic status is, getting familiar with the idea. So socioeconomic status is a measure used to assess the subjective social position and class one might be in. And it doesn't just take into account income level, it also takes into account level of education they have received, the type of financial security they have with the occupation they're currently in, if they have an occupation. Um, so, in conjunction with all those things together, you get a status of your social status and economic status. That's why it's sort of bunched in together. We have as a person or family attains greater socioeconomic status, we see a gap in the quality of life a person or family has. And with that better quality of life, you are sort of given better privileges, such as, readily access to grocery stores or having a car to actually go to a grocery store, rather than walking to a couple miles to one and having to walk back with your groceries in hand. Um, so from descending order, we have three levels of a socioeconomic status. We have a high socioeconomic status, which is basically would be the upper class, or richer Americans. We have the middle class, or the middle socioeconomic status, and we have the low socioeconomic status, which is people in poverty or barely above the poverty line. And currently in America, we have 40.6 million Americans living below the poverty line. And so studying the socioeconomic status of people is a great predictor for a lot of different things in education and health, and mapping trends of violence and various other topics, and we will see that as we move forward. I have two simple objectives for this presentation. They are to help educate you guys, my peers, on the amount of exclusivity, mainly, that people of low socioeconomic status receive, and the sort of the step back kind of that they start off with and have to overcome in order to either get out of a low socioeconomic status or stay in that cycle of low socioeconomic status. And the other one is just a little more subjective. It's just more to stimulate thoughts and ideas on how to aid in overcoming obstacles for people in the low socioeconomic status, whether it's providing more funding for underfunded schools in poverty-stricken areas, stuff like that. Try to think of ways that we can alleviate some of that stress for our fellow Americans. So here I will be talking about education and socioeconomic status, more so this low socioeconomic status. I don't know. For me, education is one of the most important parts of an American, of growing up. It sets you off for brighter future, You have a quality education, you're more likely to succeed in life, having quality teachers, quality equipment, quality textbooks. And so quality education allows us to properly educate children and prepare them for the world outside of a classroom. So this stuff is already happening in neighborhoods that are high and middle socioeconomic status. So that's good for their children, which is I'm glad. But we need to try to bring that, not exclude those of low socioeconomic status, and aid them with better funding. In my opinion, schools that are part of a low socioeconomic neighborhoods are horrendously underfunded and under-resourced, and that way children aren't given the quality education they deserve, and it stagnates, it hinders their academic progress and potential future that they could have if they had a quality education. Families in the low socioeconomic spectrum are more likely to also have lower access to resources and tools, lacking a computer or lacking access to get to a library or stuff like that. There's also decreased number of libraries in low socioeconomic neighborhoods, and it makes it harder to go to a library if they don't have a car or they have to walk miles to get to one. And this low access to tools and resources, it's adds to the, not illiteracy, but the it doesn't aid in their academic progress. It doesn't allow them to reach their full language skills and vocabulary that they should be had they gotten quality tools and resources, quality education. And they're also, the children are less likely to have their parents spend more time or have books in their household for them to read, which also aids in having a lower academic progress. But it's actually been found that teachers play a even more vital role in a student's academic progress and their future than parents would teaching them. So because the schools are so underfunded and under-resourced, we see the teachers that are hired in are less experienced, less, not quality, but they're newer, so they have to develop their teaching techniques, and they're basically learning on the job as well. And that sort of provides not a quality education for children of low socioeconomic status. As children age and go into high school, they're on average 5 years behind on literacy compared to those students that go to a higher or middle socioeconomic status schools. They also lack the guidance of college decisions, like college information, and are more likely to take on higher debts trying to receive a post-secondary education. I came from a low socioeconomic status, so it's kind of where I'm at right now. I did not have enough information. I've taken on quite a lot of debt from school, but I'm learning now. But it also takes, there are 8 times as more likely to not receive a bachelor's degree before the age of 24 than a person of middle or high socioeconomic status is. So it takes them longer to receive a bachelor's degree past the age of 24, if they end up receiving one or not. Their dropout rates are higher than those of high and middle socioeconomic status as well. Um, Overall, children of low socioeconomic families are starting off life at a huge disadvantage when talking about their education. They already are starting school behind than where they should be, and these schools are not properly resourced or funded to help alleviate some of that disadvantage, which I believe they should receive more funding. And so now we move on to the next slide. Okay, in this slide we'll be talking about family life and socioeconomic status. More so the health and the family life that they have, psychological health, physical health, stuff like that. Psychologically, families living below the poverty line or in the low socioeconomic status area are more likely to experience higher levels of stress and depression due to just trying to figure out how to financially support their family. Adults more so experience anxiety and depression. And when your body is under prolonged increased levels of stress, you start to secrete a hormone called cortisol, and this is produced by the adrenal glands that's sitting on top of your kidneys. That's released, and that's fine when the stress is just a short period of time. It won't affect your body too much. But when you are exposed to this heightened cortisol levels for a long period of time, it starts having adverse effects on your body. And this low socioeconomic status thing is more so, it's kind of like a cycle. You start off poor education, leads to poor job opportunities, and you stay in this low socioeconomic cycle. So it's more so of a long-term thing. So when your cortisol levels are raised for a long time, it starts to have adverse effects on your body, and you develop even more anxiety, even more depression. It further exacerbates the already stresses of living around the poverty line or below it. And the increased cortisol levels also add to give you headaches, or make you more prone to heart disease, trouble sleeping. Weight gain is also an issue. This leads to more physical problems, more physical symptoms for people of low socioeconomic status, and this is coupled with the decreased access to grocery stores, to parks. There's not a whole lot of parks in densely populated low socioeconomic neighborhoods. You see a lot of gas stations. Now this is speaking from experience. You see a lot of gas stations, a lot of fast food restaurants, which are not healthy. A lot of McDonald's, Burger King. But to get to a grocery store, you have to walk quite a bit. And if you're low socioeconomic status, you most likely do not have a properly working vehicle or vehicle at all. So you have to walk to the grocery store by hand, carrying your groceries, as many as you can carry. And it makes it difficult to not choose fast food and not choose to just eat fast food instead of trying to eat healthy, trying to eat home cooked meals. It just makes it a little more easier on you when your life is already in a stressful situation. It just leads to a decreased quality of life, and that's where major health issues start coming into play. Problems in family life are also known to happen. Families are more susceptible to these family problems. 70% of children with a single mother are living in low socioeconomic status as well. So single parents is more of an issue there. There's increased chance of abuse, physical abuse, and sexual, emotional abuse happening in families with low socioeconomic status, and we'll see this more as we move on to the next slide. Overall, child abuse is something we really don't want to happen in any status, and it does happen, and it's awful. But this common trend seems to be there's more prevalence in low socioeconomic status. Children are 6 times more likely to experience a form of maltreatment than those children not in a low socioeconomic status. They are 3 times more to experience physical abuse, 3.5 times more time to experience sexual abuse, 5.5 more times likely to experience emotional abuse, and that it perpetuates that cycle of low socioeconomic status when they are being abused constantly or at a higher rate, more so. It leads to just more so psychological problems, developmental problems, learning problems such as the development of ADHD, anxiety, depression, just those sort of things. They're also 7 times more likely to experience overall neglect, 9 times more likely to experience physical neglect, 6 times more likely to experience emotional neglect, and 7 times more likely to experience educational neglect. And this is where that whole starting off educationally, they are hindered, and it helps perpetuate that same low socioeconomic status cycle. It's a very vicious cycle. And these are all the numbers of cases that have been reported and most likely acted on by a Department of Human Services, and that comes with costs, having to speak with caseworkers and lawsuits and stuff like that. It just increases the cost of all that, and as they're exposed to more of this violence and abuse, they are more prone to risky behaviors such as drug abuse, alcohol abuse, smoking, stuff like that. Creating violence, becoming more aggressive, violent themselves. It has lifelong effects for them. They are the more exposure to violence, they're more likely to lose interest in school, lose interest in, have just lower scores, have more depressive symptoms, and it's really just adds to that cycle. And here we're going to be talking about adult violence, around like the neighborhood and stuff like that, and exposure to violence and how that leads to more of that low socioeconomic status cycle. There's increased prevalence of violence in a neighborhood of low socioeconomic status. You have gang activity, you have a lot of stuff like that, and a lot of kids grow up thinking that they're gonna die at a young age, usually before the age of 35. They have this early death mentality, and I can attest that is true. So they grow up thinking they will die early, so that leads to sort of the thinking that they don't need to try because they will die soon. So living in this low socioeconomic status is not going to be for a long time. So they don't try in school, they don't have heightened career aspirations, and they it affects them mentally. And domestic violence is also a huge issue in low socioeconomic status. It's an issue regardless of status, but again, it seems to be there's more prevalence in people in low socioeconomic statuses. Uh, Women who are exposed to domestic violence are more likely to lose their jobs, less likely to have stable employment, even after the domestic violence has ceased. They are still struggling to keep a job because of that exposure to violence. We have our veterans coming home with being exposed to the violences of war, coming home with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They, despite veterans, they sacrifice a lot to keep us safe, and but over about 40% of veterans with PTSD are currently homeless or living in poverty. Which, you know, this they they can receive treatment, but again, access to that treatment is difficult, especially when you're living in poverty. You don't have a vehicle to go to appointments and receive treatment. You don't have treatment facilities nearby. Even though the general consensus is to support our troops, even after they come home, that support is sort of not. It's not as inclusive to poverty, veterans in poverty. So we see and when PTSD is left untreated, you have decreased levels of income, lower employment rates, and that adds to that low socioeconomic cycle again. So the exclusion of this treatment sort of perpetuates this cycle that people of low socioeconomic status are in, especially veterans. And that is it. We have a sort of an assessment at the end here. This is that summary assessment I was talking about. It sort of goes over what I highlighted in the slides, and needs to answer the questions, and that's it. Thank you.